Growing up in a household that valued self-reliance above all else, I was always pushed to figure things out on my own. My father, a carpenter with a no-nonsense approach to life, would bring me along on his projects, patiently teaching me how to measure precisely, cut accurately, and build something solid from scratch. You don't need a fancy degree to make a good living, he'd remind me. What you need is skill and the commitment to do things right. That philosophy embedded itself deep in my mind, shaping the way I viewed success. Life in our small town was both a gift and a curse. With everyone knowing each other's business, reputations could be made or shattered in an instant. That constant scrutiny had an unexpected benefit. It drilled a deep sense of responsibility into me early on. When I gave my word, I made damn sure to follow through. In our community, trust wasn't just important, it was everything. By the time I reached high school, I had discovered an unexpected talent, fixing things. Whether it was patching up a neighbor's broken fence or figuring out why a lawnmower wouldn't start, I found real satisfaction in problem solving. These small victories didn't just put a few extra bucks in my pocket. They reinforced my belief that hands-on work could be the foundation of a meaningful career. One moment that truly stuck with me happened during a brutal summer storm when our basement flooded. My father and a local plumber worked tirelessly to clear out the water and fix the pipes that had failed under the pressure. That plumber, a gruff but oddly patient man named Mr. Bennett, explained everything as he worked, breaking down the process in a way that made it seem almost effortless. Plumbing isn't just about pipes, he told me. It's about making sure people's homes stay safe and livable. His words stayed with me longer than I expected. I started reading up on the trade, fascinated by how something as simple as running water was actually a complex system beneath the surface. It felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and the more I learned, the more I realized I wanted to be part of it. By the time I graduated, I knew college wasn't my path. While my friends packed up for universities across the state, I felt drawn to something more immediate, something real. Plumbing wasn't glamorous, but it offered something better: stability, purpose, and the ability to build something with my own two hands. As luck would have it, my growing interest aligned perfectly with an opportunity that practically fell into my lap. My best friend, Tyler, told me that his uncle Mark, a seasoned plumber with decades of experience, was looking for apprentices. The timing couldn't have been better. Before I knew it, I was stepping into a world of wrenches, pipes, and constant problem solving. A world that would soon become my passion. Tyler and I had been inseparable since we were kids, bonded by a mix of mischief, stubbornness, and an unspoken understanding that we always had each other's backs. We weren't exactly top students, but we had a way of figuring things out on our own terms. One evening, during our late teens, we sat around talking about the future, where we were headed, what we wanted out of life. Neither of us had any interest in drowning in student loans or chasing degrees that didn't excite us. Instead, we focused on something more practical: learning a trade. Plumbing stood out as the obvious choice, especially when Tyler's uncle Mark offered to take us under his wing. His offer wasn't purely out of kindness. Training us meant cheap labor for him. But it was a win-win situation. He planned to retire soon, hoping to trade in wrenches for fishing rods and endless Florida sunshine. For us, it was an opportunity to gain real skills and carve out a future without the financial baggage that came with traditional college. Tyler, always the big-picture guy, dreamed of eventually taking over the business and maybe even bringing me in as a partner. With that vision in mind, we signed on as Mark's apprentices. The pay was miserable, but the experience was invaluable. We had a direction, but life had plenty of unexpected lessons waiting for us. Those early years weren't just about learning plumbing. They were about figuring out life. We navigated friendships, relationships, and what it really meant to be loyal. One thing was always clear: Tyler and I were a team. If someone messed with one of us, they had to deal with both. We weren't the biggest guys around, but we had built up our fair share of strength from years of sports and roughhousing. I still remember the day our bond was cemented. Two meathead football players cornered me after school, looking to start trouble. Out of nowhere, Tyler came charging in, fists flying. The two of us handled the situation fast, and after that, no one dared push us around again. When it came to girls, Tyler had a natural charm that made things easy for him. He never took relationships too seriously, always keeping things light and casual. I was the opposite. My name's Ryan, by the way. And during our apprenticeship with Mark, I met Emily. We clicked instantly when we met at a bar, and before long, we were inseparable. What started as a passing spark quickly turned into something real. We were convinced we were perfect for each other in every way. As my relationship with Emily deepened, Tyler started feeling sidelined. He missed having me as his wingman, but he swallowed his pride and told me he was happy for me. One night, though, he let something slip. "You got a good thing going, Ryan," he said. "If you hadn't met her first, I'd have loved to see where things might have gone with Emily." It was an awkward moment, but I brushed it off. We had always been close, and the three of us had grown so comfortable together that we felt like family. Tyler and Emily got along well, maybe too well, but I never let the thought fester. After all, your best friend is someone you should trust, right? Life kept moving forward. Uncle Mark eventually decided to retire, selling the business to Tyler and me. My parents co-signed a loan to help me buy my share, while Tyler's parents just handed him the money outright. That left me saddled with debt while he walked away free and clear, but I didn't complain. The business was thriving, and I had just married Emily 2 years earlier. Tyler and I threw ourselves into growing the company, focusing on marketing and building an online presence. Before long, we had more clients than we could handle. The work piled up, and hiring skilled workers at reasonable wages was harder than we expected. So, Tyler and I put in longer and longer hours. Meanwhile, Emily was stuck in a job she absolutely despised, working as a legal clerk. And trust me, when Emily wasn't happy, she made sure everyone around her knew it. Emily's paycheck was decent, but her job was miserable. A sleazy coworker wouldn't leave her alone, and she despised every shift. She wanted a family, but between my debt and the long hours I was pulling, the timing never felt right. As I worked more, she seemed to withdraw, her unhappiness becoming harder to ignore. I started to worry, not just about our relationship, but about her mental state. I tried to comfort her. "This won't last forever. Just hold on a little longer." But my reassurances fell flat. She wasn't listening. Then, out of nowhere, something changed. The tension vanished. The frustration, the resentment, it was like it had never been there at all. At first, I was relieved to see her happy again. But then, I started noticing the details. Our relationship, once predictable, had taken a drastic turn. Emily became more affectionate, more engaged, especially in bed. She initiated things she'd never shown interest in before, catching me completely off guard. It left me wondering, where was this coming from? Needing an outside perspective, I turned to Tyler. We met at our usual bar, beers in hand. "You seem off, man," he said, giving me a once-over. "What's going on?" "It's Emily," I admitted. "She hated her job, mostly because of some creep who kept hitting on her. Then suddenly, she's all smiles, and things at home have changed." I hesitated before adding, "I can't help but wonder, who's been teaching her?" For the briefest second, something flickered across Tyler's face, something quick, something subtle. But I caught it. "You're overthinking it, Ryan," he said too easily, taking a sip of his beer. And just like that, I knew I wasn't. That Saturday, I decided to set the trap. Over breakfast, I kept my voice steady, careful not to let on what I was thinking. "Got a packed schedule today, tons of jobs. Won't be home till late. Perfect time for you to invite your friend over." Emily froze. The color drained from her face so fast it was like she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't stop there. "You know exactly who I mean. The guy who's been getting a little too close." Tears welled instantly, and before I could say another word, she bolted from the kitchen. I grabbed my keys and left, making a show of heading to work. But I wasn't going anywhere far. A few hours later, I returned. The moment I turned into the driveway, my stomach twisted into knots. Tyler's truck, parked right in front of my house. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut, but anger quickly swallowed the shock. Slamming my truck doors shut, I stormed to the front door, barely aware of my shaking hands as I unlocked it. I expected to walk in on something unforgivable. But instead of the betrayal I had pictured, I found them sitting stiffly on opposite ends of the couch. A tissue box sat between them, the floor littered with crumpled tissues. Their faces were red and blotchy, eyes puffy, like they'd been crying for hours. Too bad for them. I didn't care. Tyler scrambled to his feet, hands raised in surrender. "Ryan, listen." He never got to finish. I was on him in an instant, my fist colliding with his face. Blood spurted from his nose as he hit the floor. "Don't even try, Tyler," I spat, my voice cold as ice. "You're nothing to me." Then I turned to Emily, my fury burning hotter. She flinched under my glare. "And you start packing. You're out today. Tears streamed down her face. Ryan, please, let me expla. Shut your mouth. I cut her off. I don't want to hear a damn word. Don't insult me with lies. Grab your things and get out. Emily hesitated for half a second, then ran to the bedroom. Tyler, still on the floor, pressed tissues to his bleeding nose, groaning in pain. You too, I said flatly. Get out of my house. Now. A few minutes later, Emily emerged, a small bag in hand, her face streaked with tears. She avoided my gaze as she slipped past me. Tyler opened his mouth like he was going to try again, but I shut him up with a hard punch to the gut. Out. Both of you. My voice was low, steady, and full of finality. Tyler staggered to his feet, still gasping, and followed Emily. I stood in the doorway, watching them climb into his truck. They didn't look back. The second they were gone, I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. For a long moment, I stood in the silence of my empty house, heart pounding, mind reeling. Then, I forced myself to sit down and plan my next steps. Step 1, divorce. Step 2, cut Tyler out of my life permanently. The divorce was straightforward. No kids, no shared assets beyond our rental house and separate cars. But the business? That was the real issue. I was still deep in debt from the loan I took out to buy my share, while Tyler, thanks to his parents, walked in debt-free. The thought of dealing with him for even one more day made my blood boil, but I needed a plan. So, I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer, Lisa Morgan. She listened as I laid everything out. The divorce should be simple, she assured me. Your prenup keeps the business separate from marital assets. The real challenge is the partnership. That's when her husband, David, leaned forward. Ryan, you need to decide what you want, David said, his expression unreadable. Do you want to fight for the business, or are you ready to walk away? Either option is valid, but the approach will be different. I didn't even have to think. I want out, I said, my voice firm. I'm done. David nodded. Then you'll need to sell your share. If you want an easy exit, sell it to Tyler, but make him pay what it's worth. If you'd rather make things difficult for him, sell to a competitor. They'd likely break up the company, absorb its assets, and push Tyler out of the market. That last option sounded tempting. But then David added, of course, that could leave your employees jobless. That made me hesitate. We had 5 solid workers, good people who didn't deserve to suffer for this mess. I can't just walk away, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. My parents co-signed my loan. I won't leave them stuck with my debt. Understood, David replied. We'll serve Tyler with notice of your intent to dissolve the partnership. He'll have 30 days to buy you out. As for the divorce, we'll make sure Emily gets served at work. That should send a clear message. For days, I shut myself off from the world. Calls and emails from Tyler poured in, desperate and pleading, but I ignored every single one. He whined about missed jobs, angry clients, but his problems weren't mine anymore. To drive the point home, I sent him and Emily the same picture, my middle finger, with a simple caption, "Go to hell." By the third night, they made a mistake. A big one. I was sitting in my living room when I heard the front door creak open. They had used Emily's key to let themselves in. Rage flooded my system. Without a second thought, I stormed into the living room. Tyler barely had time to react before my fist collided with his face. Ryan, stop. Let's talk. He pleaded, shielding himself as I swung again. Another hit, another crunch, blood gushed from his nose. Ryan, please. Emily shrieked, her voice shaking. I turned on her, my chest heaving. Tyler is never setting foot in this house again. And you? You lost any claim to it the second you betrayed me. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her keyring, finally pulling it free. She placed it in my outstretched hand without a word. If you have anything to say to me, do it through my lawyer, I said coldly. And don't bother showing up if he's with you. Now get out. I turned back to Tyler, barely restraining my disgust. As for you, be at the office tomorrow at 8. We're handling this in front of the staff. Oh, and just so you know, I've already spoken to Walker's Plumbing. They're ready to buy my share. His expression darkened, but he said nothing. They shuffled out like criminals caught in the act, and I locked the door behind them. They thought they had taken everything from me, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. That night, I made my next move, publicly. I updated my Facebook status to separated and let the world know exactly what had happened. Time to set the record straight. My wife, Emily, and my so-called best friend, Tyler, have been having an affair. They betrayed me in the worst way. A wife cheating with her husband's business partner. Can you imagine? Effective immediately, I've thrown her out of my house, and I'm severing all ties with them both. The divorce is already in motion, and I'm selling my share of the business. If you consider yourself my friend, do me a favor. Don't ever mention their names around me again. They're dead to me. The post exploded. My phone lit up with messages, sympathy, outrage, shock. I ignored most of them, except for one. Emily's father, Richard. Out of respect, I answered. Ryan, he said, his voice heavy. I don't know what to say. She's staying with us tonight. She's devastated. She says she made a horrible mistake. She still loves you. I clenched my jaw. If she really loved me, she wouldn't have done this. Would you at least be willing to talk to her? No, I said firmly. She knows the only way she'll hear from me is through my lawyer. I'll never forgive her, Richard. He sighed. I understand. I just wanted to try. I'm truly sorry, Ryan. You deserve better. Thank you, I said. And tell Linda the same. You've both been good to me, and I wish things had turned out differently. Take care, Richard. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8 sharp. The entire staff was already there, sensing something was off. Tyler sat stiffly, his swollen face a testament to the night before. I stood in front of them all, letting the weight of the moment sink in before I spoke. Let's cut to the chase, I said, my voice cold. Tyler and Emily have been having an affair. If any of you knew about it and kept it from me, there will be consequences. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Here's what's happening, I continued. I'm selling my share of the business. Walker's Plumbing is interested, and if they buy, this company could shut down. I can't promise anything about your jobs, but I'll do what I can to make the transition smooth. You all deserve better than this mess. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, one by one, they left the room, leaving just me and Tyler. He glared at me, jaw tight. Did you have to air our dirty laundry to everyone? I laughed bitterly. You destroyed everything, and now you're upset people know about it? Grow up, Tyler. Ryan, listen, he said, desperation creeping in. Emily doesn't even want me. She loves you. I leaned in, voice low. I don't want her either. I'm not looking to settle down, Tyler said, his voice tinged with desperation. Can't we just put this behind us and focus on the business? I stared at him, barely able to comprehend the audacity. You seriously think I'd stay in business with you after this? I scoffed. The clock's ticking. You've got less than a month to buy me out, or Walker's Plumbing will take over. I don't care what happens to this place anymore. Ryan, please. I didn't let him finish. I'm done. Without another word, I turned and walked out. As I reached the door, I raised my middle finger in the air, making my final message clear. Later that day, Lisa informed me that Emily had requested a meeting. She wanted to bring her father and a lawyer, none other than the sleazy coworker who had harassed her at work. The irony was almost laughable. Still, I agreed. Not to reconcile, there was no chance of that, but to face her one last time. The next morning, I met with Lisa early. Her advice was simple. Let them talk first. See what they're after. When Emily arrived, she looked like a ghost of herself. She couldn't meet my eyes. Richard, her father, extended a hand. Ryan, I'm sorry we're meeting like this. I hope you can keep an open mind. I shook his hand. It's good to see you, Richard. I wish it were under better circumstances. Then my gaze shifted to her lawyer, Harrison. He smirked as he offered a handshake. Let's get this nonsense resolved so you two can work things out, he said, his tone oozing condescension. I gripped his hand hard, locking eyes with him. That's not happening, Harrison, I said sharply. I've heard about you, especially how you harass my wife at work. Let's keep this professional. You may address me as Mr. Carter. His smirk faltered, and Lisa stepped in smoothly. Mrs. Carter, please explain why you requested this meeting. The divorce terms are equitable, and my client has made it clear that reconciliation is not an option after such an egregious betrayal. Emily opened her mouth, but Harrison cut in. That's quite the exaggeration. I shut him down immediately. It's not an exaggeration. It's the truth. Are you here to contribute or waste our time? Emily finally found her voice. Please, everyone, let me speak. I called this meeting because I don't want a divorce. I still love my husband. Ryan, please, just sit down and talk to me. I was about to reject her outright when Richard intervened. Ryan, please, he said, calm and steady. Just hear her out. Let the two of you talk alone. If it doesn't change anything, I won't interfere again. Richard had always treated me with respect, as had his wife, Linda. I owed them at least that much. Fine, I said reluctantly. One conversation. Out of respect for you and Linda, not for her. But don't expect my mind to change. Lisa nodded. Legally, there's no issue with a private discussion. However, if Mrs. Carter has any objections to the divorce terms, now is the time to state them. Harrison hesitated. No objections at this time, but my client reserves the right to request court-ordered counseling. Lisa didn't even flinch. Noted. If that's all, this meeting is adjourned. As everyone filed out, Richard paused beside me. Thank you, Ryan. I truly appreciate this. I nodded, though it was hard to accept his gratitude after everything. You're a good man, Richard. But this won't change anything. That night, I packed the last of Emily's things and told her she could pick them up the next evening 5 p.m. with Richard if she wanted. Right on time, the doorbell rang. Emily stood there, nervous and fidgeting while her father waited in the car. I led her to the dining room, the most formal, impersonal space in the house. She sat across from me, her discomfort plain. Say what you need to say, Emily, I said, my voice cold. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling. That I love you, Ryan. That I was in a terrible place. I hated my job. I hated my boss, who's now my lawyer, by the way. I hated that you were always working late. I know you were doing it for us, to secure our future, but I felt so alone. I scoffed. So, what? It's my fault? You just happened to fall into Tyler's bed by accident. No, she protested, tears brimming. That's not what I'm saying. I was depressed, Ryan. I saw Dr. Whitman, and he prescribed antidepressants, but I was too ashamed to take them. I felt like a failure. I had a wonderful husband, a good life, but I was falling apart. I wanted to start a family, but you said it wasn't the right time. I felt like I was losing everything. Her words barely registered. And that led you straight to Tyler? I asked bitterly. She wiped at her eyes. It wasn't like that. One night, Tyler called. I told him you were working late again, and he seemed surprised. He said you shouldn't have to work that much if you were the boss. She swallowed hard. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Were you really working late, or was there someone else? I felt like I'd been slapped. You're telling me you cheated on me because you thought I was cheating on you? No, she whispered. I was already spiraling, and that thought broke me. Her voice cracked, but I stayed silent, letting the weight of her words sink in. But nothing she said changed the facts. You should go, I said finally, standing up. Richard is waiting. Emily's face crumbled, but she didn't argue. She stood, wiping her tears as she walked to the door. I didn't follow. I didn't say goodbye. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was the end, and for the first time, I was finally ready for it. When Tyler came over, I was falling apart, Emily whispered, her voice unsteady. I was crying, and he comforted me like a friend. But then, I kissed him. I started it, Ryan, not him. And after that, things spiraled. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. We tried to stop, she insisted. Twice, we told ourselves we couldn't do this deal. But my depression took over. I kept going back because I needed the comfort he gave me. She looked at me, her expression raw with regret and desperation. That day you came home early. We weren't doing anything. We had just decided to end it for good. And then, you walked in. I stared at her, unmoved. Her words were just noise, hollow, meaningless. She must have realized it too because the hope in her eyes flickered out, replaced by quiet acceptance. It didn't matter what she said. The reality was clear. The so-called cure for her depression had been my best friend. That was her excuse. That was what she clung to. You've got a twisted way of showing love, Emily, I said, my voice as flat as my feelings for her. Not a single thing you've said makes this easier to stomach. You betrayed me with the one person I trusted most. Both of you are disgusting, and I want you out of my life. Her tears fell harder, but I felt nothing. Just sign the divorce papers, I continued, my tone cold. Let's get this over with. There's no forgiveness, no second chance. You cheated with Tyler? Do you even understand what that means? It's done. Finished. She sobbed quietly, but I wasn't finished. I never thought I could stop loving you, but you've managed to make me feel nothing but disgust. You repulse me, Emily. I'll never look back on this marriage with anything but regret. I stood, signaling the end of the conversation. She trembled as I walked her to the door. Richard waited outside, his face lined with quiet sadness. When our eyes met, I shook my head slightly. He sighed, stepping out of the car to wrap his arms around his daughter as she broke down. He whispered something to her, voice low and soothing, while I stood there, stone-faced. Then Richard returned to help load her remaining belongings into the car. Emily stayed inside, crying softly, while we worked in silence. When we were done, he turned to me and extended his hand. "Thank you, Ryan," he said quietly. I shook it, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Take care, Richard. You're a good man." Letting go of him hurt more than letting go of his daughter. He hadn't deserved any of this. Once they were gone, I focused on Tyler. Halfway through the 30 days I'd given him to buy me out, he called. I didn't want to answer, but unfinished business left me no choice. "What is it, Tyler?" I said, my tone sharp. "If this isn't about the buyout, I'm hanging up." "It is," he said quickly. "I've been to the bank. How much do you want for your share?" $200,000. "What?" He balked. "That's double what you paid. Be reasonable, Ryan." "I can't afford that. You know how tight things are." I scoffed. "Are you serious? You don't get to negotiate after what you did. This isn't a favor, Tyler. You need to raise the money, take out a loan. I don't care how. You're buying me out, not robbing me. Come on, Ryan," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, okay? But if you don't work with me, the business will collapse." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's the idea, Tyler. 200,000 is what Walker's Plumbing offered me. If you can't match it, I'll sell to them. Asterisk." A week later, he called again. "Ryan, the best I can do is $180,000. Can we work something out?" I hung up. As the deadline neared, he called one last time, voice tense. "Fine. $200,000. I'll pay it. Asterisk." I stayed silent. "Ryan," he snapped. "What's the problem?" I said I'd pay your price. "That's what Walker's bid," I replied. "You need to beat it." "For God's sake, Ryan," he groaned. "Fine. How much more?" $200,005, I said coolly. "Take it or leave it." He cursed under his breath. "Fine. You win." By the deadline, the payment was made, and Lisa confirmed the deal was final. I was out. No more Tyler, no more partnership, no more ties to betrayal. It was time to move forward. Months passed before the court finally scheduled our divorce hearing. I hoped it would be quick, a clean end to the nightmare. Things started smoothly. Both sides had agreed to the terms. Then Harrison opened his mouth. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "my client requests court-ordered counseling." My frustration boiled over. "You've got to be kidding me," I blurted. "Mr. Carter," the judge snapped. "Keep your language appropriate in this court. Your attorney may respond." Lisa remained poised. "Your Honor, counseling is entirely unnecessary. This case involves a severe breach of trust. Mrs. Carter engaged in an affair with my client's best friend. Mr. Carter has made it abundantly clear that reconciliation is not an option. Counseling would be a waste of resources." The judge turned to Emily. "Mrs. Carter, do you wish to address the court?" Emily stood slowly, looking fragile, like she might shatter if the wind blew too hard. Her voice wavered. "Your Honor, I know what I did was unforgivable. I've lost my husband's love, and it's tearing me apart. I just want a chance to show him how much I care. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I need him to know how much he means to me." Her words were raw, filled with regret. "I've been on antidepressants, but nothing helps." She trailed off, her voice breaking. I sat there, stone-faced. I wasn't moved. This was just another consequence of her choices. Choices I could never take back. Choices that had shattered everything. The only thing left now was for the judge to put the final nail in the coffin. "I feel like my life is falling apart," Emily whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "All I want is to fix this, to be the wife you deserve. Please, give me that chance." The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, his tone measured. "Your pain is evident, and I don't doubt your sincerity. But counseling requires the willingness of both parties. Mr. Carter, are you open to attending?" I met his gaze, my voice steady and firm. "No, Your Honor. I will not attend counseling or pursue reconciliation. This marriage is over." The judge sighed, the finality clear in his voice. "Understood. Divorce granted. No counseling will be ordered." And with that, it was done. 3 weeks later, just as I was beginning to settle into my new life, my phone rang. Richard. His voice was tense, strained in a way I had never heard before. "Ryan, it's Richard. Can you come to the hospital?" I sat up straight, my chest tightening. "What's going on? Why are you calling me?" "It's Emily," he said, his voice cracking. "She's not doing well. The doctors, they don't think she'll make it. She's asking for you." His words hit like a sledgehammer. My first instinct was to ask why he thought I should be involved, but something in his tone, raw, pleading, made me pause. "I'll be there," I said. At the hospital, I approached the reception desk, my nerves fraying. "I'm here for Emily Carter," I said. The nurse glanced up, her expression neutral. "Are you family?" "We're divorced," I replied, my voice tight. But I was told she asked for me. Her face softened slightly, and she pointed me toward the emergency department. Richard was waiting outside, looking paler than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me, he took a deep breath before speaking. "Ryan," he hesitated. "I'll get straight to the point. Emily is 6 months pregnant. The doctors say her health is failing, and the baby is at risk. She hasn't been eating, hasn't been taking care of herself. They're both hanging by a thread." Pregnant. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Emily was pregnant, and she never told me. Richard placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "She wants to talk to you," he said. I nodded stiffly and followed him inside. Emily lay in a hospital bed, pale and frail, her once vibrant face gaunt. The steady beeping of the machines around her made it clear just how dire things were. I hesitated, then stepped closer. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of my footsteps, and when she saw me, tears pooled in her gaze. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice so weak it was almost inaudible. "I'm sorry." She took a trembling breath. "I didn't know I was pregnant. When I stopped eating, I thought I was only hurting myself. I didn't realize it was our baby." Her words cut deep, breaking through the wall of anger I had built around myself. But a darker question crept into my mind. "Is the baby even mine?" I asked, my voice cold. She must have sensed my doubt because she quickly added, "He's yours, Ryan. I made Tyler use protection every time." Before I could say another word, her eyes fluttered closed, and the machines around her erupted into alarms. Doctors and nurses rushed in, urging me to leave. I stumbled into the hallway, overwhelmed by emotions I hadn't felt in months. Richard sat nearby, his shoulders slumped. When he looked up at me, his expression was one of exhaustion and guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you, Ryan," he admitted. "When I found out about the baby, I assumed it was Tyler's. But Emily swore it wasn't. She said she never wanted kids with anyone but you." I wasn't sure if I should say anything. I nodded slowly, processing his words. He sighed. "I've done my best to help her, but she's been falling apart. Linda, well, she's kept her distance. She hasn't forgiven Emily for what she did to you. And honestly, neither have I. But I couldn't just abandon her." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than most would, Richard. You're a good man." We sat in silence until a doctor approached. "Are you next of kin?" the doctor asked. Richard nodded. "Yes, you can speak freely." The doctor exhaled heavily. "The immediate crisis has passed, but the situation is still fragile. The baby is small, underdeveloped. And Emily, she may not make it through the next few months. We're doing everything we can, but you both need to prepare for the possibility that the baby will be born prematurely, and that Emily might not be there to see it." Then he turned to me. "Are you the father?" I hesitated before answering. "It seems so, but I only found out about the pregnancy today." The doctor nodded. "If the baby survives, a paternity test will confirm it. But if you are the father, you need to be ready. Because if Emily doesn't make it, this child will be your responsibility." The weight of his words crushed me. Was this really my child? And if he was, could I do this? Miraculously, both Emily and the baby held on. After weeks of intensive care, she gave birth prematurely to a baby boy. He was tiny, just over 4 pounds, but alive. Emily's recovery was slower, and her health remained uncertain. Then the results of the paternity test came in. I was the father. The realization hit harder than I expected. Fatherhood was something I had once dreamed of, but under these circumstances, it felt tainted. The joy I should have felt was buried under layers of resentment and loss. Emily and I would never reconcile. That much was certain. Too much damage had been done. No amount of apologies could repair what she had destroyed. But the child, my son, was innocent, and I couldn't turn my back on him. As I held him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I knew my life had changed forever. This wasn't the future I had imagined, but it was the one I had, and I would face it. A few days after the baby's birth, my phone rang again. Richard. His voice was cautious, hesitant. "Ryan, I need to talk to you about the baby." I leaned back in my chair, my grip tightening on the phone. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Emily wants to know if you'd like to be involved in naming the baby, Richard said cautiously, as if he were carefully stepping around a landmine. His words caught me off guard. I hadn't even thought about that, I admitted. We're divorced. I figured that was her decision to make. Richard exhaled. She also mentioned that she doesn't want the baby to have your last name. She's thinking of giving him mine a Hayes. Are you okay with that? I let out a slow breath, considering it. Richard, that's a conversation you should have with her, I said after a pause. But don't you think I should meet my son first? Silence stretched on the other end before Richard finally responded. You're right, Ryan. You should. Come by tonight. 7. I agreed, feeling a strange mix of hesitation and curiosity as the call ended. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at Richard's house. He opened the door, his usual warmth dimmed by everything that had happened. Behind him, Linda lingered for a moment, her face worn with exhaustion. She hugged me lightly, whispering, "This isn't the daughter we raised, Ryan. We never wanted this for you." I nodded but said nothing. Then, they left me alone with Emily and the baby. She looked up as I stepped inside, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, Ryan. Thanks for coming. Would you like to hold him?" I hesitated. I had no idea what to feel. This baby was innocent. He wasn't responsible for the mess we had all made. Slowly, I stepped forward and took him into my arms. Something in me cracked the second I held him. A surge of emotions, grief, anger, longing, and something deeper, hit me all at once. His tiny face turned toward me, his unfocused eyes blinking up at mine. My chest tightened, and before I could stop it, a small, unexpected smile crossed my lips. Emily noticed. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" she said softly, her voice careful, like she was afraid to ruin the moment. I nodded, unable to stop the storm of emotions. But just as quickly, reality set in. My heart clenched with the weight of everything that could have been. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice raw. "Why did you throw it all away? We could have had a perfect life. This should have been the happiest moment of our lives." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know. I made choices I can't take back. Choices I'll regret for the rest of my life. But Ryan, can't we try to fix this? Can't you at least try? For him." I looked down at the baby, feeling the weight of her words. But they didn't change anything. I tried handing him back, but she didn't take him. Instead, she straightened, her voice firmer. "Ryan, you're not a coward. You never have been. Don't run away from this. He needs you." I sat down, still holding my son, as silence settled between us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke. "Richard Hayes Carter," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "How does that sound?" Emily's breath hitched, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love it," she whispered. "The two best men in my life." Her words stung, but I let them pass. "Emily," I said, my tone steady, "I need you to understand something. I'll always be there for him. I'll support him, raise him, and make sure he has the best life possible. But you? I can't forgive you. I can't be part of your life anymore." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. "What you did destroyed everything," I continued. "I won't pretend we can fix something that's beyond repair. I'll be here for my son. But you and I? We're done." After selling my half of the business and repaying my debts, I used what was left to start over. Plumbing was all I knew, so I launched my own company, Ryan Carter Plumbing. I had my truck rebranded with a new tagline, "Former managing partner of J&M Plumbing." If Tyler had an issue with it, he never voiced it. Work flooded in. My reputation still held weight, and before long, I had more clients than I could manage alone. Financially, I was stable, but life felt empty. I threw myself into work, set up child support for Richard Jr., and even started a college fund for him, one that he'd receive on his 25th birthday, whether he went to college or not. I made it clear to Emily that I wanted as little interaction with her as possible. Richard became the bridge between us, doing his best to manage the fractured mess of a family we had become. He was steady, kind, a man caught in the middle of a situation he never deserved. Emily, on the other hand, remained a shadow in my life. Her apologies continued, but they meant nothing to me. She had destroyed any chance of us rebuilding. The idea of a future with her wasn't just impossible, it was something I refused to entertain. So, this was my life now. Working hard, taking care of my son, and existing in a space somewhere between moving on and being stuck in the past. I didn't know what the future would bring, but as I held Richard Jr., I knew one thing: he was my reason to keep going. For him, I would face whatever came next. 6 months later, Richard called again. This time, his voice was quieter, heavier. "Ryan, I need to talk to you about Emily," he said. I frowned, my grip on the phone tightening. "What about her?" "She's struggling," he admitted. "She reminds me of you. How you've buried yourself in work and Richard Jr. She has nothing else. She hasn't dated, hasn't even considered it. She's pushed everyone away." That didn't surprise me. But then he hesitated before adding, "Even Tyler." That made me pause. "Tyler?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Yeah," Richard said carefully. "He made a move on her a couple of months ago." She shut him down immediately. Something inside me twisted. I had assumed she and Tyler would eventually end up together. It would have been the easiest route. No strings, no expectations. Maybe that's what Tyler had counted on, that he could just slide into something casual. The thought made my stomach turn. Hadn't I wanted them to suffer? But now, my concerns shifted. If Emily was spiraling again, it wasn't just about her. It was about my son. For a brief moment, I considered seeking full custody. The idea of keeping Richard Jr. with me, away from Emily entirely, was tempting. But reality hit fast. I wasn't prepared for full-time single parenthood. Not yet. The alternative was harder to accept, but it was the only path forward. I needed to help Emily stay stable, both for her sake and for our son's. The problem was, every option involved more interaction with her than I wanted. My pride recoiled at the thought of forgiving her, of even being in the same room without resentment simmering under the surface. Forgiveness felt impossible, but life had a way of forcing hard choices on you. Then Richard suffered a minor stroke. There was no lasting damage, but the warning was clear: he wasn't invincible. He had been carrying too much, taking on burdens that weren't his to bear. Linda, still struggling with Emily's betrayal, had kept her distance, leaving Richard to hold everything together. Now, that weight was taking a toll on his health, and I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. We arranged what Richard jokingly called a non-family family meeting. It was time to figure out a long-term plan. Emily agreed to stay on her medication and focus on being a mother. Linda, though reluctant, promised to be more supportive of Richard. And me? I committed to being more present, not just as a father, but as an active co-parent. It wasn't an easy decision. Every part of me still felt the sting of betrayal, but Richard Jr. came first. That meant setting aside old wounds and showing up, not just when it was convenient, but consistently. I started helping in small, tangible ways. Twice a week, I brought meals over, sticking around until Richard Jr. was asleep. On weekends, I cooked, nothing fancy, just simple meals like meatloaf, pasta, or roast chicken. Surprisingly, my meatloaf turned out better than expected. Spending time at the house meant unavoidable interactions with Emily. At first, we kept our conversations clipped and strictly about Richard Jr., but something changed over time. We began talking about him in ways that felt natural: his habits, his milestones, the funny little things he did. Slowly, the sharp edge of resentment softened. Not enough to forget, but enough to see her as a person again. I also took it upon myself to make sure she stayed on track with her medication. Small gestures, checking in, making sure she had groceries, ensuring she wasn't isolating, seemed to help. Bit by bit, she started pulling herself out of the darkness. Watching her regain pieces of herself forced me to reevaluate my own bitterness. Yes, she had hurt me. But had I been right to treat her like an irredeemable villain? She had lost her home, her independence, and the relationship she had once sworn meant everything to her. She hadn't dated, hadn't moved on. Meanwhile, I had built something new: my business, my stability, and I had made sure Tyler paid for what he did. But was Emily supposed to suffer more than him? Then there was Richard Jr., the child caught in the wreckage of our mistakes. He didn't deserve parents at war. And he certainly didn't deserve to lose his mother because she couldn't hold herself together. Richard's stroke had been a wake-up call. He had sacrificed his health to keep everyone else afloat. That had to stop. The following Saturday, I arrived at Richard and Linda's earlier than usual. I needed time to speak with Emily alone. Richard and Linda, sensing what I was about to do, took Richard Jr. out for a while, leaving us in the quiet house. Emily sat at the kitchen table, wary but waiting. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Things can't continue like this. Richard's health is fragile, and him carrying the weight of this situation isn't fair. You, Richard Jr., and something needs to change." Her expression flickered with uncertainty. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked cautiously. I exhaled. "We need a different arrangement. The three of us need to find a place to live together." Her eyes widened, hope flashing across her face before she caught herself. "Don't misunderstand me," I said firmly. "This isn't about us. It's about Richard Jr. and about making things easier for everyone involved, especially your father." The flicker of hope dimmed, but she nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. Thank you for thinking of this. Let me be clear," I continued, my tone sharper. "This is a practical arrangement. I haven't forgotten what you and Tyler did, and I doubt I ever will. This isn't about rekindling anything between us. It's about stability for Richard Jr. and making sure your father doesn't run himself into the ground taking care of everything." Emily looked down, absorbing my words before nodding. "I get it, Ryan. I do. And another thing," I added, watching her carefully. "I've also realized that someone needs to ensure you stay consistent with your medication. I'm willing to be that person, for Richard Jr.'s sake. He deserves both parents in his life." She nodded again, but before I could finish, I leveled one final condition. "If you ever start a relationship with someone else, this arrangement ends immediately. We're divorced, Emily. I'm not here to play the role of your babysitter while you move on." Her expression softened, and despite my clear boundaries, a small, genuine smile broke through. "I understand, Ryan," she said quietly, "but I want to be honest with you." I tensed. "Honest about what?" "I'll agree to this. I'll respect your rules. But that doesn't mean I'm giving up on you," she admitted. "I won't push you, and I won't try to force anything. But I'm going to spend every day proving that I can be better, that I can be the partner you deserved all along." Her words hung between us, heavy and unspoken. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Maybe I never would be. And so, the three of us moved into a modest 3-bedroom house. It was a strange, fragile arrangement. Two people carrying the weight of a broken past, trying to navigate a co-parenting dynamic that was anything but conventional. For me, living with Richard Jr. full-time was both fulfilling and overwhelming. He was a curious, energetic child, constantly discovering the world around him. At 10 months, he wobbled around on shaky legs, determined to explore every inch of our home. By 14 months, he had mastered a handful of words, his laughter filling the house in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Every moment with him reminded me why I had agreed to this arrangement. From the outside, we might have looked like a normal family. Meals together, the daily chaos of raising a toddler, shared responsibilities. But beneath the surface, it was anything but. Emily and I lived under the same roof, yet our bedrooms were separate worlds. Those private spaces became our retreats when the reality of our situation felt too suffocating. Despite my self-imposed rules, I struggled with the idea of moving on. I wasn't bound to celibacy, but something kept me from seeking out another relationship. If I ever chose to be with someone again, I resolved, it would have to be completely separate from the life I had built around Richard Jr. Meanwhile, Richard's health improved. Freed from the stress of managing Emily's situation and helping with Richard Jr., he slowly regained his strength. Even Linda seemed to soften, the years of anger and hurt gradually giving way to something resembling acceptance. For a while, life found an uneasy rhythm, but I should have known that peace wouldn't last forever. Emily, despite outward appearances, was struggling. She adhered to the boundaries I'd set, but I could see the weight of them wearing her down. She missed closeness, real closeness. And if I was honest, so did I. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, she finally broke the silence that had hung between us for months. "Ryan," she said, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "I love you." I stiffened, my hands clenching around the dish towel. "I know you don't want to hear it, but I do," she continued, voice thick with emotion. "I've watched you growing more restless, and it scares me. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. These past months have been a gift, being with you and Richard Jr. again. But this," she hesitated, "this half-life is hurting both of us." Her words felt like a blow to the chest. Without answering, I grabbed my keys and walked out. For the first time since we had moved in together, I left before Richard Jr. was asleep. I drove aimlessly, my thoughts racing. No matter how much I had convinced myself that the past was behind me, it had never really been gone. It had followed me into this house, into every quiet moment, into the nights when I lay awake questioning if this arrangement was sustainable. Eventually, I ended up at the staging post, the bar I hadn't set foot in for over a year. The moment I walked in, regret settled in my gut like a lead weight. The place smelled the same, the dim lighting and familiar faces making it feel like nothing had changed. But I had. And then I saw him. Tyler. His reflection caught my eye in the mirror behind the bar, and before I could turn to leave, he spotted me. His expression shifted, surprise first, then something softer, something that irritated me even more. Ryan. He greeted cautiously, walking toward me with hesitant steps. Let me buy you a drink. I glared at him, the anger I thought had dulled over time suddenly flaring to life. Get lost, Tyler, I said coldly. I have nothing to say to you. His hand dropped, but he didn't walk away. Instead, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. I get it, he admitted. You have every reason to hate me. But, Ryan, I'm glad to see you doing okay. I heard you and Emily are living together again. That's good. I'm happy for you. I scoffed. Happy? I repeated. We're not together, Tyler. We're not married, and we never will be. And that's because of you. He flinched, but didn't argue. Ryan, he said quietly, I know I can't undo what I did. After the divorce, I tried to make things work with Emily. I thought maybe we could have something real. But she turned me down. I frowned, my grip tightening around my drink. She told me you're the only man she's ever loved, he continued. That she'd never love anyone else. That she'd wait for you, no matter how long it took. His words left me momentarily speechless. He sighed. I've made a mess of everything, Ryan. But if there's one thing I know, it's that she still loves you. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. I locked the door behind me, the conversation with Tyler still swirling in my head. I called out softly for Emily, not wanting to wake Richard Jr., but there was no answer. Her bedroom door was closed. I knocked lightly, then pushed it open. She was curled up on the bed, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Without thinking, I walked in and sat beside her. She didn't move. Kicking off my shoes, I slid under the covers and pulled her trembling body against mine. She melted into me, her tears soaking into my shirt. We lay there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Then, without fully understanding why, I tilted her face toward me and kissed her. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Ryan, she whispered, her voice breaking. I love you. I kissed her again, softer this time, then pulled back just enough to meet her gaze. If you ever betray me again, I murmured, I won't forgive you. Ever. She nodded, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. I won't, she promised. Never again. I love you, Ryan. Always. For the first time in years, I let my guard down. I didn't know if it was exhaustion, forgiveness, or something in between, but the barriers I had built around my heart began to crack. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a clean slate. But it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Life doesn't give us perfect endings. It forces us to confront the things we would rather leave buried. As I held Emily that night, I realized that rebuilding isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about facing the pain, acknowledging the scars, and choosing to move forward anyway. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it never returns to what it was. But maybe, just maybe, we could create something new. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real. And for Richard Jr., for us, and for whatever future we had left, I was willing to take that first step.